welcome to The Room to Write. We're doing our Journey of a Story series where we talk to different writers that are local and find out how they published and how they write and what their story is. So today we're talking to Hayley Barrett, and she's going to tell us about her new children's book, Babymoon, as well as her writing process. So welcome, Hayley.
Thank you, Colleen. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. And so let's just kick off with paint the picture of us writing, or you writing, I should say, and what does that look like, and where do you begin?
I would say that one of the things that I realized was most important for me is what a profession of, I write children's literature exclusively, picture books, and we hope middle grade novels as well. I'm working on a bunch of different projects all at the same time, but I'm not someone that grew up wanting to be a writer. And I think that's very important to say. There are people that knew they wanted to be writers from when they were tiny little children. That was not me. I was more of a storyteller. I like to pay attention. I sort of file stories away in my head, and I remember them for a long time, and little bits and pieces. I notice a lot of things. But I'm not the person that was scribbling in notebooks forever. I began seriously writing probably 10 years ago. And started with picture books, which are my great love.
And so what was it about picture books that, 10 years ago did you decide, I'm going to write a picture book, or did you just start writing stories?
I wrote a few smaller stories, but nothing, they were almost practice stories, just getting going. But I had an idea in mind, which is actually Babymoon, which is the first book that's coming out April 2nd, 2019, from Candlewick Press here in Boston, which is wonderful that they're local.
Nice.
And that's the book of my heart. That was the one that I really wanted to write first, and if I could manage it, I really wanted to publish first, and that's happening. So,
why is that the book of your heart? Where did that come from? Where did that idea spark from?
Babymoon actually comes from maybe 30 years ago, a long time ago, when I was in school to be a nurse midwife. So the term Babymoon is not my term. It was coined by another person, Dr. Sheila Kitzinger. And it means to take time after the birth of a baby to quietly fall in love as a family, to sort of cocoon together. And so that's where I learned the term, and it just meant a lot to me at the time. And then years went by, and I saw it being used for all other purposes, for different purposes, for vacations and this and that. And I wanted to kind of bring it back to its original meaning. So that's what I did.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So let's see, what does it look like when you're writing? Do you get up early in the morning? Are you overnight writing? Are you
Sometimes I'm overnight writing. Sometimes I'm up in the middle of the night
writing. So
writing.
sort of give us a sneak peek into that.
I wish I was a 9-to-5er, and I'm working on that. I write when I have to. Sometimes I stop in the middle of doing dishes if something wants to happen, and then I sit down and start working on it right away. I do spend time every day writing or researching or doing something related to marketing work for Babymoon or other books. But sometimes I write standing at my kitchen island. I do have a dedicated writing space that I can keep all of my stuff and my manuscripts and my research. So
okay.
I use
And so you scribbling things on a not supposed to work in the bedroom. Are you scribbling things on a white line paper and then putting them into your computer, or how does sort of the raw information get down, and then how does that sort of start to polish up? What's that process like?
I'm a keyboard writer exclusively. I'm a very visual writer. I don't see specific illustrations when I write, but I definitely see impressions. That's not true of every writer. It's true for me, and that's sort of what I follow as a story path. So I visualize and I write on the computer. Okay. I don't use imagery when I write, but one thing I do, which was one of the best things I ever learned from another local writer, Jen Malone, I keep a separate Pinterest board, private, secret Pinterest board, for each of my picture books, and that's kind of a vision board, and that has been extraordinarily helpful to me in terms of organizing my idea and keeping me focused on it. And
yeah, and so how does that work? Like, what do you do? And even if it wasn't on Pinterest, is it something you could do with real images? And
absolutely.
And what are you looking for when you're looking through that, and how are you organizing that? Because that's
I look for colors. I look for emotion. I look for people that would be appealing characters. I do pin illustrators if I see particular work that I like, but generally don't pay attention to the name of the illustrator, because that decision is almost always not made by the writer. That decision, the pairing of the writer and the illustrator, when it's not the same person, is done by the editor. So that's not traditionally something that I would have input into that decision. But I, luckily, in the case of my books, I have had input, but I keep it very vague about who I would like. So.
And so you got your basic stuff down, and so how does that become the finished product? Do you have a critique group, or do you have your friends read it, or what's that process like?
I actually have two separate critique groups. One is just 2 people, and another is a group of, I should count, but maybe 7 at the biggest. And critique groups are a funny thing. It's really, it strikes me as being a little bit akin to dating, although I haven't done that for a long time. You have to find people that click with you, people that respond to your work, people that understand what you're trying to get at and what you need to hear, and that aren't necessarily imposing things on you, but are trying to work with you. And that can take some time. Which is why it's so important to find a larger writing community. I have the children's literature community, which is extraordinarily active in New England and all over the country, and they are lovely and they are friendly, and it is a profession of beginners, so come in and the water's fine. They're lovely people. So started there, going to a big conference and then regional conferences, and little by little I met my people, and now I have my
when you
critique
talk
groups.
about that community, is that SEBWI, or
Yes.
is that other people? Or?
SCBWI.
Okay.
I'm not going to try to say it. But
Society for Children's
Yes.
Book Writers and Illustrators.
Right. Thank you, Colleen. Right.
And
That's the
so
larger community.
That is a community that's sort of all over the place, and they're doing all sorts of events.
all over the world.
And are there any communities sort of locally or regionally or in Massachusetts or wherever that you can go that you've gotten support with also, and how do you find your critique groups and those types of things?
Yes. The down in Sherborne, Massachusetts, which is right past Wellesley, there's an organization called the Writers Loft, and they have been the nerve center, my creative home, for many, many years. They have dedicated writing space. They have critique groups, they have events, they have editor-agent events, they have all kinds of things. And it's only been around for 5 years, but I think there's well over 100 members, and that's been absolutely wonderful. But you need different groups for different purposes, so it's wonderful to have the room to write, have a local place that I can look to, and I think it's very exciting. So.
Nice. And you're talking a little bit about your illustrator and how that process works. Did you want to go into talking anything more nuts and bolts about the actual publishing process and sort of the timeline and what the reality looked like from when you said, I'm ready to publish this book, and when the publishing world said, you're ready to publishing this book? So
very
kind
different
of
things.
Walk us through that.
So I decided to go to at least begin this writing career with traditional publication. I wanted to be an agented writer so that the major publishing houses would be open to me. So most of the big publishing houses that people know of are completely closed to unsolicited submission. So however wonderful your manuscript is, you cannot just send it to them. You need an agent as a go-between. That's not true for everybody. There are other publishers that are open, and so you can find that information online of who will welcome your manuscript and who will not. But I decided to pursue getting an agent, and that took a little bit of time. But I signed with my wonderful agent, and then we sold Babymoon to Kennewick Press in Boston. From the point of sale of a picture book manuscript, depending on who is assigned to illustrate it, it's typically 2 to 3 years. Okay. I will have waited 4 years, and it will be worth every single minute, because the person that Kennewick hired to do the illustrations is a genius. So I got in line. She had her own projects going. Her name is Juana Martinez Neal, and she lives in Arizona. I've never met her. I hope to meet her someday. But I had to sort of get in line behind the other projects. She's a very successful illustrator. And then when it was time, she started working on Babymoon.
Wow.
So yeah.
So I guess, you don't think of that all the people that come into the process, and like the illustrator is not just tapping her foot ready to go. She's working
Most
just
of the
as
time,
hard as
no.
everybody
Right.
else.
Especially for really accomplished people, you have to wait. So it could have been a lot longer. I was
Yeah.
lucky.
And now the agent process, what's that like? Did you just write query letters till the cows came home, or how'd you find your agent?
I did not write query letters till the cows came home. I paid attention I went to my writing community, and I went to writing events, and paid attention to the advice of other people, how they got their agents, how they searched for their agents. And then I started paying attention to who the agents were and who I thought, who did work that I admired, who I thought I could click with personally, because I was, you want the right agent. It's not when you really want to be represented, it's hard to be patient for the right agent, but I wanted the right one. So I had a feeling that this particular agent and I would work really well together. And then I was very fortunate, through a writing community connection, someone she's normally completely closed as well. You can't just send stuff to this person. Okay. But through somebody that I hardly knew, she read Babymoon and said, send this to my agent. And so I did. And then I sent 4 more manuscripts over the course of a year, showing the agent my range, my interests, how I worked, and then we signed. And so that was it. And happily, Babymoon sold very shortly thereafter, because I was exhausted, so ready to move on with that. Yeah.
In this day and age, this sort of makes me wonder and think, when you're talking about how you found your agent, there's so much online and social media, but it almost sounds like you got to show up in person, and you got to make these connections in person to really be able to do something. How much of online versus actually going to events and showing up in person and meeting people helped get you to the point you wanted to get to?
I think both are really valuable. I enjoy being active online. I'm on Twitter, a little bit on Instagram, quite a bit on Facebook, and so you get to know people really quickly all over the country, all over the world, which I think is really fun and interesting. Attending events is important. There are scholarships for a lot of things. A lot of things are free, which I think it's important to keep an eye out for low-cost ways to just meet people and network with them and get to know them, and then you go from there and you learn little by little.
Right. So a lot of times we're talking to writers, and writing is not their day job. The question is it your day job, and how did it become your day job? And then sort of what are you seeing for the future in terms of your career choice and where that's going to lead?
I've learned so much about this. I'm incredibly fortunate that it is currently my day job. This is what I do. And the reason for that is I spent a long time home with children, doing professional volunteering and working in the schools and doing all kinds of things. And then when that chapter of my life was coming to an end, this became an opportunity for me to do this full time, which I love. And now that the books are coming, I'm realizing and learning that a big part of not every writer's life or children's literature people, not every person, but a lot of people spend a lot of time doing school visits. And that is a big part of the income stream. Doing conferences, doing talks, doing teaching, and doing school visits is part of how I will earn my living as a children's writer.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because I don't think we've talked about that before, that writing the book and publishing it is one thing, and from talking to other writers, that's not necessarily going to pay the bills. Right. But there are other ways to still, even though writing is your day job, it's not just the writing that becomes part of it. Right. It's the actual going to schools, talking to people in conferences and things like that. So do you want to talk a little bit more about maybe how much of that, what's the actual amount of that encompasses?
Going to conferences?
Right, and schools and that sort of thing.
Schools I've only just started to do. I have a writing workshop that I've developed around my second picture book, which is narrative nonfiction. It's a picture book coming from Beach Lane Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, next fall. And that is actually a little bit of local history. That's called What Miss Mitchell Saw. And it's about the 19th century astronomer Maria Mitchell, who was born and grew up on Nantucket. And in 1847, when she was 29, was the first person in the world to see a particular comet. And because of this, this was reported to the astronomers of Europe, and the King of Denmark at the time offered what was sort of the equivalent of the Nobel Prize, which is a royal gold medal for the first person to spot a telescopic comet. And she won this gold medal. And it, more than winning a gold medal, it really put American astronomy on the map, because before that, it was a volunteer, even the professors at Harvard weren't paid for astronomy work. So Maria Mitchell herself really put the United States on the map as far as astronomy was concerned, and created a big sensation, which she did not care about, and put the medal in a drawer and went back to her telescope. So she went on to have a fascinating life, did a lot of different things. But so I've developed a writing workshop around that, where the children edit, these are middle schoolers generally, they edit the manuscript in 3 different stages. The first is when I sent it to my agent, and she thought it was good to go immediately, which is very rare. So that hasn't happened yet again. But that one, so they edit, I read this one, and then the editor, who's Andrea Welch at Peach Lane, had me expand it quite a bit. So I give them each a copy of the expanded one, and then I have in reserve the finished text. So what happens is the children edit the manuscript, but of course I know the ending of the story, so it's in no way painful to them or to me to take a red pen and slash everything that's boring, everything that's extra, and that's been really successful. I've done that locally and also in California.
Yeah, and that's great, and that gets to the heart of writing is messy.
It does. Editing, very messy.
Right, and I think a lot of times, especially young people, they think, you know, I mean, and so much of your emotion and your own self value is put on that page the first time, and so it's hard for writers, especially young writers that don't have the experience yet, to say, you know what, that doesn't work, and that doesn't mean you don't work as a writer. It just means that doesn't work in this piece. So I think that's a great activity that you have there.
And developing their stamina, developing their strength of what their opinions are about their own work, which are ultimately the most important. They have to put their heart into their work, or it won't be as strong as it can be. And then you have to learn how to do that even while other people have opinions about it as well. Because of course, if you want to publish your book, whether it's traditional publishing or self-publishing, you're telling the world that you'd like the world to see it. And so other people are going to have opinions. So it's nice to start in safe ways with critique groups or in schools, things like that, to get used to that experience of having other people have an opinion about your work.
Yeah. And so I'm starting to notice a theme of you do a good amount of research for your books. Do you want to talk about maybe the idea of incorporating history and incorporating folklore or whatever that is, and if that's a part of all 3 of your books, or, you know, what part of that?
I think that's just a part of me. Everything I write, and this came to me over time, everything I write has nonfiction. So whether it's Girl versus Squirrel, which is just a funny STEM-based girl and squirrel butting heads, there's nonfiction in that. Everything the squirrel does is accurate according to squirrel behavior, and I know this because I had a particular question about squirrels, couldn't find it in my regular research, and so I Googled squirrel expert, which miraculously works, and I found Dr. John Kaprowski at the University of Arizona, who was more than happy to answer my very particular squirrel questions. So yes, I do a ton of research. I try to make sure it's accurate. I think kids deserve that. I know as a child, as a reader, I liked learning things and appreciated when I could pick up little snippets of nonfiction in anything that I read. So, yeah. And
so will these, I mean, are they going to be nonfiction in the nonfiction section, or are they considered fiction, but the bonus is you're actually learning nonfiction? Or?
The second book will be nonfiction, shelved with the nonfiction, picture books with the biographies, and the other 2 are fiction. So, yeah, they'll be with the regular picture books.
Okay, and so going along, publishing your first book. It's coming out in April. So what does that feel like? What does it look like? Maybe talk a little bit about the roller coaster. Did you experience a roller coaster, or was it all
indeed.
puppies and rainbows?
Several roller coasters, yeah.
So maybe talk about a little bit of the reality of you need to sort of have a tough skin for some of this, and maybe how writers that are not to that part of it yet can not lose hope and maybe continue to work on their projects.
Don't lose hope. Keep going. Ultimately, the creative person, whether it's the writer or the illustrator, has to believe in the work, and that there's no substitute for that. And that can be challenging for 5 or 10 or 20 years or however long it takes. That can be challenging. And that's why you need people to support you. That's why you need to keep working on new projects as you're waiting. Babymoon is now inside of 6 months, which means things are heating up. Suddenly we're starting to have to do stuff, which it's been a long time of waiting, and now things are moving. So
what is stuff? What stuff do you have to
do? Starting to print up postcards and bookmarks and talk to booksellers. Very soon be included in blog posts. Mia Wenjen, who's a local blogger extraordinaire, pragmaticmom.com, did the cover reveal for me, which I was incredibly grateful for. So we got a lot of online attention for that. It was very exciting.
Which you have
I do. I have
cover with
this
you.
Is actually the first color proof, which is part of the publishing process. I can't show you the inside because it's all very top secret right now.
Just make sure your microphone can still hear you.
Yeah. So this is Babymoon.
Oh, wow.
By me and illustrated by the brilliant Juana Martinez-Neal, who won the Pura Belpré Award last year for Latino children's literature.
Okay, so did that just arrive in the mail, or how do you get that?
This arrived in the mail, and this is one of many proofs, I imagine, where they check the text, they check the colors, they make sure they spell my name right, which is sometimes a challenge, and make sure everything's correct. So
nice. And how come there's a piece of paper that looks like it's sticking out?
This is all part of the construction of the picture book. The way it will be printed is this larger piece of paper is what will be glued on the hard board of the book itself when I get that. So
okay,
all these things to look forward to. And in writing, this is a advice that one of my critique partners says all the time, Rajani LaRocca, who has books coming out: celebrate everything, every small step, every rejection is a celebration, because if you are not being rejected, then you are not submitting your work. So I knew another writer, I can't remember who it was, that said her goal was 10 rejections a year, which I think is a really beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah.
She said, if I'm not getting 10, I'm not trying hard enough.
I met my goal already.
Yeah, so it's, I think that's a really heartening way to put it, that, that you have to get out there, and all these little moments you have to celebrate, the cover reveal or whatever. So, yeah,
right.
Very exciting.
So where do you go from here? You're writing a new book, or you already have those books written? How do you decide what you're going to write next?
Constantly writing new books, and I try, picture books are like really especially adorable and challenging children that pull at your attention. So I always have a bunch going at once, but it's tricky to decide what to work on first. I consult my agent about what she thinks I should work on, but most of the time I have to listen to my heart about what wants to be written, what wants most of my attention. So I'm also working on the job. It's the kind of job which is wonderful and thrilling that keeps changing. My job now as a almost published writer is to also be responsive to all of my editors. They need stuff from me all the time, whether it's changes or revisions or questions or this or that. So I have to do that and work on revisions that they want me to work on for other pieces. So it's very multifactorial. Keeps me hopping.
And you say editors, so you don't have just the one editor.
I have 3 editors at 3 different publishers. So it's Candlewick Press here in Boston, Beach Lane, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, and Holiday House, which is a New York City children's publisher. So I have 3 different editors and 3 different illustrators. And
why is that? So one publisher doesn't just say, I want all 3 of your books, or how does that work? I mean, that's
sometimes we wish that would happen.
Interesting.
And that's more true for novels. So I have lots of friends who are middle grade and YA novelists, and that is more about developing a relationship with one editor. It doesn't always work like that, but it's more about developing a relationship with one editor. Picture books are passion projects. Sometimes I'm doing a revision right now for one of my editors, and fingers crossed she likes that one when it's done. But picture books we submit to multiple different editors, and someone will hopefully fall in love and buy it.
Yeah.
So.
And so what does the editing process look like for you?
The Babymoon was super challenging, which I'm very grateful to my Candlewick editor. She was extraordinarily patient. She knew it was my first time at the rodeo, and she was extraordinarily patient with me. I had polished Babymoon to the nth degree. It was as polished as I could get it. And then we went through a major revision process, which was very, very challenging to even sort of touch this thing that you would work. And I'm not precious about my work, but Babymoon has some gentle rhymes, and people will tell you, you hear a truism in children's literature, rhyming books are hard to sell. I'm finding that's not true as much as they are impossible to revise. If somebody wants you to change it, now this entire house of cards that you built will be restructured, and it's very challenging. So, but we did it. We managed, and I learned a lot.
What did you learn? What are some things you can help others learn?
I learned to. I think once again, I learned to trust myself. I couldn't hardly touch it. I would look at it. I made it several false starts, and then one day, my daughter walked up and just very briefly put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You can do this," and that was the day that I made significant changes. So a lot of the words are the same, but the structure's totally different, according to what the editor wanted. And then eventually we came to one that we liked, and there it is.
So you had to kind of
that's the one that the world will see. Yes, really, several giant steps back.
Yeah.
And to envision it at all in a different structure. So it's sort of like the same words to a song, only different music. And so that was very, very challenging. But I learned to do that, and I learned to respect the rhyme, especially when it comes to revising it.
Right.
I still write in rhyme, but revising it I know is going to be a challenge if we sell another one. So,
Yeah.
Where nonfiction was a little more natural.
Right, right. Now, does the nonfiction part, does that rhyme as well? Do all of your books rhyme?
Nope,
Oh, okay.
Nope.
So
it's
just
narrative
this one.
nonfiction.
Okay.
So it's a completely different creature. So Babymoon is more focused on the new family, new parent, baby gift sort of an audience. What Miss Mitchell saw is elementary school, and library. It's very beautiful. It has whales, and it has stars, and it's gorgeous. Diana Sudika is doing those illustrations, who did illustrations for the Mysterious Benedict Society. She's a genius. The work is beautiful. And the third one, I haven't seen any artwork yet, but that's illustrations by Renee Andriani, who's very fun and has a real gift for creating a connection between a human and an animal. So those are the editorial decisions that are made. That's how they choose an illustrator, who can best meet the needs of the book. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, we have a million things we could be asking you still, but in the interest of time, is there anything in particular that you sort of want to leave the viewers with in terms of advice, things you wish you knew before you began this journey, or what do you want to kind of leave people with?
Find a community. Find your critique group. You are a writer, whether you feel comfortable calling yourself for that or not. The more you hang around with writers, the more comfortable you'll feel. Claiming that as part of yourself and part of your life. And at least as far as children's literature concerned, as I said, it's a profession of beginners. They're very welcoming, people at all different phases, and I was really thrilled, not quite surprised, but really thrilled to learn that I was welcome and that it was wonderful. So yeah, it's great.
Well, thank you so much, Hayley.
Thank you, Colleen.
It was great talking
Lovely, a lot of
to
fun.
you.
Thank you so much.
And if anybody would like to join us in the studio and talk about your writing, then please email me at colleen@theroomtowrite.com or visit the website. And thanks again.